Taylor Shoe presents.
If I tell you we are going to explore Football Manager today, you may think we're talking about Sports Interactive's juggernaut that's released reskinned every year with a new number after the name. But if you, like me, grew up playing games in the mid-80s, you will know that those games are not what I want to talk about. When I hear Football Manager, I think about this guy, Kevin Toms. This video is all about how Mr. Toms chose to boldly go where no man had gone before and create one of the most popular genres in gaming. When I started getting into computers and computer games, you could not leaf through any computer magazine without running into these ads. Kevin Toms was already a professional programmer working on mainframes when he started working on Football Manager. Mr. Toms had been designing board games as a hobby since he was a kid and saw the move to put the games on a computer as a natural progression of his hobby. Kevin was a big fan of Torquay United and started working on a football management simulation in his spare time. During development, he let his friends test it and soon discovered he couldn't get them off the computer. Hence, Kevin Toms' company Addictive Games was born. The game sold well, and Tom soon secured big deals with retailers such as Smith's that allowed him to quit his day job and focus on games. The first version of the game was produced on cassette in Mr. Tom's bedroom, where he'd have to get up from watching TV every 15 minutes to change the tape in the recorder. The first version with the iconic graphical match engine was the version for the Spectrum, and this was also the first version I played on my mate Christopher's Spectrum 128K. We were about 10 years old and our knowledge of English was very limited, so at first many things in this game were mysteries. 99 to continue? What does continue mean? And what does endured mean? Eventually though, with the help of my mate's two older brothers, we managed to actually play the game. The original Football Manager is a simple game, but it's very playable and a lot of fun. It was the first chance gamers ever had to be the boss of a football team. You do the normal footy manager things, you buy and sell players and you pick your team. Then there were the very exciting match sequences that shows highlights of the game. The goals in the Spec version are about the size of an airplane hangar and the pace is pedestrian. You can't skip the highlights, so if you're playing on original hardware, make sure you have the weekend free. Luckily, if you're playing this on an emulator, like I am, you can just increase the speed of the emulation and fly through the matches, putting emphasis on the management part. Management is basic, but still allows for different strategies and some depth. You have to keep track of both the player's skill and energy while navigating around those pesky injuries I mentioned earlier, and you don't know how long an injury will last. The key to success in Football Manager is rotating your squad a few positions at a time to save energy. This actually takes some practice and some planning getting perfect, making for an interesting game mechanic. Then there's always the problem of balancing the budget. Every week one random player is available on the transfer market. The player on the transfer list is random and most of the time you won't have any use for him, but a couple of times a season you'll find a gem. When the season ends, some interesting game design decisions gives you a chance to game the transfer market a little. Players have no age and there are only 5 skill levels. By the end of the first season, half the team can easily be at level 5. So how did Mr. Toms handle the problem that you might have built a dominant team of skill 5 players in the first season? Well, the skills randomly changes after the season and you have to build your squad again. This gives you some interesting options. Look at Robson on the Season 2 squad. He was bought on the last week of Season 1 at skill level 1. Randomly he's skill level 4 the next week. If you stay in the division and you're not promoted, you can also sell your skill 5 players before the season ends, because you can only lose money by keeping them. If you're promoted though, you might as well keep them because value doubles when you move up a division, This game kept us busy for hours and hours, and our own imagination was probably half the gameplay back then. There isn't a lot of press coverage to find from the early 80s. This game was so early that reviewing computer games wasn't even really a thing yet, but it made it into Sinclair User in February of '83. The article mentions highlights in 3D. I can kind of see what they mean, but their idea of 3D was vastly different from the modern idea. Football Manager was the game that really convinced me I needed to get a computer. I pestered my parents until I got the C64. The C64 version is very similar to the Speccy version. The highlights are a little more colorful and the menus are faster, but it's essentially the same game. There was also a belated Amiga version not released until the 90s that is best forgotten as quickly as possible. How would you like to sit through this after every league game? Between the first and second games, Kevin Tom sold Addictive Games to Prism Leisure Corporation in 1987. Prism kept the Addictive label for select games, like the forthcoming installments in the Football Manager series. The development of the sequel were delayed by the numerous conversions of the original game. But 6 years later, Tom's and Addictive Games were ready to unveil the second installment in the series. Football Manager 2 expanded on the first game in several areas. You have the same core mechanic, where the game rolls around screens every week where you do your business. This time around, you get a few players to choose from in the transfer market, and you have the added option of training, which essentially lets you adjust how the team pass the ball by increasing or decreasing passing height or length. The biggest changes are with the match engine that now has more tactical elements to it, and the pre-match tactics are actually kind of fun to play around with. You now get to place your players in defense, midfield and attack by selecting exactly what position they occupy. The tactical elements come into play when matching your players against the opposition, plugging holes in the back and finding gaps in attack. In defense, it also helps to match your best defender to their best attacker, and so forth. The highlights are then played out on 3 screens representing 3/3 of the field, the defensive third, midfield and the attacking third. The Amiga version of Football Manager 2, unlike the Amiga version for the original game, came out at the same time as the other versions. The Amiga version is a faithful conversion, but with mouse controls that make you want to throw your gear out the window, and the sound effects. The crowd boos when your keeper makes a save, and it sounds a lot like they cry when you score. The goals are not at the center of the goal line, and they are drawn at a slightly different perspective than the pitch. The Amiga version does have one cool redeeming feature though. You get a replay of the goals from behind the net. The Amiga version is largely unplayable, and you're better off sticking to C64, but it's still not as bad as the Amiga version for the original game. Addictive Games also released a Football Manager 2 expansion kit where you could customize the game or edit saves. It had things like changing team and player names or renaming the cups. It does exactly what it's supposed to do, but it's rather hard to use. Button presses are slow and unresponsive, and you regularly have to go back and fix what you just typed. It's still an interesting addition to Football Manager 2. The game got mostly favorable reviews, and from reading them I get the feeling this was partly from riding on goodwill from the aura of the legendary first installment. Addictive Games released a special version of Football Manager for the 1990 World Cup in Italy. Football Manager World Cup Edition lets you play through the World Cup qualifying with a team of your choice, and if you manage to qualify, also the final tournament in Italy. The game has gone through another evolution and there are more tactical options. The match engine is improved and now allows you to watch the whole game. The first view has player sprites, but because of the limitations of the system it's so zoomed in that it's confusing and rather useless. The other is a much better, albeit simpler view that shows the whole pitch with players represented by letters. The letters represent the various player types that are present in the game. There are no actual positions except for goalkeeper, but rather player types like passer, tackler, runner and striker. The players can be assigned a playing style like forward runs or wing play. I picked Sweden. You have to edit your player names or you will have to play the game with English players, so I set up a rough version of Sweden's 1990 squad and set off to the qualifiers. I got hammered by Poland in the first game. Some quick analysis shows going for wing play when the ball stays in the middle of the pitch most of the time is not a good idea. Wanting to see if the tactical decisions made a difference, I set up a tactic that exploited this fact and destroyed England in the next game. The fact that you can make adjustments and the tactical instructions work as you expected makes the matches rather fun to coach. The engine has problems with some instructions, like some players hugging the sideline for long periods of time, and all the goalkeepers seem to play like René Higuita. My Sweden team got through the qualifiers and made it to the World Cup. Sweden famously lost all games in 1990 by 2-1, but we improved on reality and got through the groups. We had a close game with the USSR and another tactical adjustment got us to 3-3.
By golly, Jim, I'm beginning to think I can cure a rainy day.
And a replay in the World Cup. By this time, Addictive Games were already slipping behind the competition. Amiga Joker did a comparison on the available competition which puts World Cup Edition firmly at the bottom of the pile, way behind even US Gold's Italy 90. I think this is an interesting game though. I never played it back in the day, but if I had gotten my mittens on it, I would probably have sunk many hours into it. The development process for the World Cup Edition was straining, and Mr. Toms wasn't completely happy with the result. Football Manager World Cup Edition was to be his last game with the company he once founded. He left the company because of artistic differences in 1990. There was one more game in the original Football Manager series. Football Manager 3 was released late in the C64's life without any involvement of Kevin Toms, even though promo material for World Cup Edition mentions a contest where the prize is your face on the FM3 box next to Kevin's. After being delayed a few times, the 8-bit and DOS versions finally arrived in 1992, and by that time the world of football management had long since left the series hopelessly behind. From promotion screenshot, it seems the 16-bit versions for Amiga and ST were developed but never released. For a C64 game, it's ambitious but unfortunately not very good. It's slow and cumbersome, and the graphics-based menu had replaced the classic flow of weekly progression that the series fans had become accustomed to. The menu is hopeless and incomprehensible and adds nothing to the game. The match engine is slow and hard to follow. The coolest feature in FM3 are the player portraits, but they don't make up for the sorry state of the rest of the game. The DOS version improves on speed, but it's in essence the same game. It too is marred by strange design decisions, like the overhead view having players so small you can't see them, while having detailed trucks going by the arena outside. Its release was met with a shrug of the shoulder by the gaming community. It's not even listed on Lemon 64, and it sold badly, and it wasn't widely reviewed, and the few reviews were all over the place, ranging from the 30s to the 70s. Football Manager 3 was to my knowledge the last game released under the Addictive Games label. After the commercial failure that was Football Manager 3, Prism Leisure seems to have retired the Addictive brand, which marked the end of the original series. If you feel the urge to play this classic again and you do not own the original, you can always download Kevin Toms' Football Star Manager for Android or iOS and give it a whirl. It's essentially the same as the original. It even has a retro mode for the graphics. It's kind of pointless though, it looks like it's just the regular sprites painted over by a single color. The Football Manager name was, as I'm sure everyone knows, acquired by Sports Interactive and Sega following Sports Interactive's departure from Eidos. It's disheartening as a fan of the original series to see the Sports Interactive version called the first Football Manager. So here it is, the history of the original Football Manager series. Almost 40 years after its initial release, Football Manager is still the biggest name in football management games.